The Newfoundland seal hunt. This is the first of two programs on the Newfoundland seal hunt, presented by Radio Canada International. I'm Kathy Kiefler. The programs you are about to hear deal with the economics and politics of the controversial hunt that every month of March for the past 10 or more years has pitted fisherman against protester. The moral battle takes place not only on the ice floes, but on editorial pages and on the airwaves across North America and Europe. While researching these programs in Newfoundland and elsewhere, freelance broadcasters Bill Usher and Deborah Sharp uncovered some little-known or publicized facts about the lucrative hunt, particularly how it has become and is sustained as a cause célèbre. Listen to some of them now, in this first program entitled 3 Blows to the Skull.
The harp seal's brain, located in its skull, is responsible for responding to painful experiences. Therefore, you should destroy that pain terminal as quickly as possible. This can be done by either 3 blows to the top of the animal's head with a bat or hack-a-pick, or a bullet through the brain. Either of these methods make the animal immediately unconscious so that it cannot feel any pain. Hello, I'm Bill Usher, and I'm quoting from a document which is read to all of the licensed Newfoundland sealers each year before they take to the ice. The instructions go on to describe a humane kill. Never ever attempt to skin a seal until you are sure it is unconscious. This can and must be done by the simple procedure of touching the animal's eye. If the seal blinks, it is not unconscious, and sealers using bats or hack-a-picks should then strike these animals until this blinking reflex is gone. Before attempting to skin a seal, you must make sure that the blinking reflex has disappeared and the eye is glazed and starry. What we see on TV is a bloody slaughter. On the ice, a sealer raises his club and brings it down 3 times on the skull of a 1-week-old white-coat pup. Then with his knife he makes an even cut from the lower jaw to the tail, and the blood flows. A slaughter, yes, but is it cruel and barbaric?
As far as the killing method is concerned, the techniques used to kill young seals by hitting them over the head is the same technique that's used to kill cows in slaughterhouses and all the rest of it. And adults are shot the same way we shoot forms of wildlife like deer and moose. And so the killing techniques are totally consistent with how we kill animals in our society. And so at the present time, I don't think that's a major issue.
Dr. David Levine is a marine zoologist at the University of Guelph in Canada. Sometimes called the Greenpeace ecologist, he has been singled out repeatedly by protest groups as the one man who supports their position of ending the hunt.
I've seen both. I've been to slaughterhouses, I've been out in the ice, and there's basically no difference in the technique. So I do not think the cruelty issue is a very big issue at the present time. I would also say, however, that when the public outcry first began, perhaps in the early to mid-60s, that the killing techniques were not supervised the way they are today. And I think it's rather reasonable to assume that there was considerable amount of cruelty, and that there has been some positive results from this public protest. And some of the credit for this has to go to the protest movement in the early days. No question about it.
For 10 years, the Humane Movement of Canada had examined every known method of killing large numbers of animals routinely by lay people, which is what a slaughtering operation is, whether we do it in our animal shelters, killing dogs and cats, or whether we do it in a slaughterhouse killing cattle, or whether we do it on the ice killing seals. It's a slaughtering operation carried on routinely, large numbers, by lay people.
Tom Hughes was one of the original protesters. He spent close to a decade fighting the inhumane killing procedures used in slaughterhouses, and as executive director of the SPCA in British Columbia, played a prominent role in bringing about the Humane Slaughter Act in 1960. His interest in sealing began in 1957, when he organized the first public meeting in Canada to protest the killing of seals. Hughes went on to become the executive vice president of the Ontario Humane Society, and in 1964 made his first trip to the hunt. His concern was to find the most humane way of killing, and ironically enough, for a man dedicated to the cause of protecting animals, he became an expert in the killing of them.
We said, these methods are humane. These methods are humane if we use the criteria for humane as being a method which kills an animal instantaneously or renders the animal unconscious with the minimum physical and mental pain, and from which the animal does not recover consciousness. That's our definition of humane.
With these criteria in mind, the humane organizations launched an extended study into slaughterhouse killing, finally proposing 4 acceptable killing techniques.
The methods included shooting, electricity under certain circumstances, certain gases, and clubbing of lambs and calves, followed by exsanguination in each case, in every case rather. Exsanguination is a very near perfect way of killing an animal. He simply bleeds to death. There's no pain involved, it just goes to sleep. So you render the animal unconscious by an approved method, then you exsanguinate it. You can kill a seal with your finger, literally. It's very, very easily killed. The skull itself is very thin. Practically any kind of a blow to the skull will kill the animal or render it irreversibly unconscious, is the phrase that the pathologist will use.
John Lonergan is a member of Parliament for the province of Newfoundland. He is also a licensed sealer.
Once you do that, there's no pain at all as far as the professionals are concerned on the part of the animal. But the rules state that you must hit it, then re-hit it, and re-hit it 3 times. It appears as if you're really beating it to death. But the first time you kill it, and Captain Morrissey Johnson said, look, you hit it the first time to kill it. This was his lecture to his sealing persons that morning. You hit it the first time to kill it. You hit it the second time for the fisheries officer, and you hit it the 3rd time for the press.
3 times to make sure that the seal pup is rendered irreversibly unconscious before it's bled to death. A humane death. But ironically, it's this constant clubbing which arouses the anger of so many armchair viewers.
Hello, this is Henry Fonda for the International Fund for Animal Welfare. You know, several years ago I saw some footage on TV of those baby harp seals up in Canada being beaten with wooden clubs, and I just can't get that out of my mind. 170,000 of those infant white-coated seals.
If you go out there,
die for an industry.
you could take a bunch of naive people out on the ice and show them the hunt, or show it to them on television. And it looks bloody awful. You have these cute animals, cute in appearance, I mean, look at them, being hit over the head and skinned. You've got red blood on white ice. And this is all filmed in color and pumped into living rooms over supper. And for a person who's not used to death, this is a sickening sight. And some of these animals, depending on what part of the brain is crushed, will exhibit a fish-like motion. So they are moving when they're killed. There's no question that they're dead, or let's say there's no question that they're severely unconscious and terminally unconscious. But they're exhibiting this fish-like movement. That's enough to bother a lot of people. I mean, it bothers me. But it bothers me when I see a cow killed in a slaughterhouse. I mean, when you're exposed to it firsthand, it has quite an emotional impact. And I think it's very easy for somebody to say, I don't care what you say, that is cruel.
It's easy to see why those of us who have no understanding of what it's like to go out to the backyard to kill our dinner, and who travel in our cars to the closest supermarket to buy cellophane-wrapped lamb chops, think of the hunt as a savage undertaking. But it's another thing to the person who does it. Bill Porter is a fisherman from Port de Grave, Newfoundland, and for the past few years he's been to the front to kill seals. What does it feel like to him?
I don't know what it felt like. I don't like killing animals. Same way with anything, or even, there's no one likes killing anything, but it's just a way of living. There's a good part of living, and you know, there's just something like the same as killing a cow, or well, you take a lamb or a calf, young calf. Well, there's nothing. A seal don't look any better than they do. I'd rather see a lamb or a calf than a seal. There's really no cruelty into it. Well, people might think it's cruel to kill animals, all right, but there's no cruelty into it as far as the killing part is goes. Because the seals are killed instantly, and they're all killed by experienced hunters. And you know, there's the same way if you got a government-run slaughterhouse. There's government inspectors there, the cattle is getting killed, and there's experienced butchers there, or whatever, and government control. In the same way, we got fishery officers standing up, looking at us, watching, making sure that animals are killed properly.
Hello, this is Beatrice Arthur. Actually, it's hard to believe that such a thing still is taking place, but, well, here's what it's like. It's March, and the magnificent blue ice floes are teeming with newborn baby harp seals. A few days after the white-coated pups are born, the ice is teeming with Canadian and Norwegian seal hunters, if you can call them that. They carry hard wooden bats and poles with steel hooks. A day later, 120,000 baby seals are
In an
beaten
ad
to
published
death.
in newspapers
Almost the
around the
entire
world,
population.
Brian Davies, head of the International Fund for Animal Welfare, begins with a personal quote. It reads, "I have seen steel hooks driven into the flesh of conscious infant seals, and then there are the guns and clubs." Sound awful? It's supposed to. But what Mr. Davies is actually describing is the government-approved Norwegian hackapick. The blunt protrusion at the top, similar to a poleaxe commonly used in slaughterhouses, is used to strike and pierce the seal's paper-thin skull, rendering it unconscious. And although the club is just as effective, humane organizations recommend the use of the hackapick. It produces more visible damage, and though it might look horrible to Mr. Davies or anyone else, it enables the sealer to see that the seal is actually dead before he skins it.
And we reached the conclusion, as I said, that the club, using our criteria as a method which either kills the animal instantly or renders it unconscious, is humane in probably 95 to 99% of the cases of animals killed. There'll always be a percentage of animals killed inhumanely in any killing or slaughtering operation, including Humane Society animal shelters, which we operate, including veterinary hospitals, where animals are killed, including slaughterhouses, in spite of the regulations, in spite of the government inspectors. In other words, no matter what you do, if you're killing large numbers of animals routinely and regularly, there'll always be a human element factor. And you have to either live with that or else abolish killing.
Out of context, 5% may sound like a wide margin for error. But putting this figure back into a larger picture of slaughter operations, it becomes apparent how small it really is. In a recent report issued by the European Economic Council on pre-slaughter techniques for domestic animals, it was revealed that 15% of the animals examined were not killed humanely. In other words, 15% were still sensitive to pain at the time of death. A much larger 37% was recorded in some poultry plants. Not only European research supports the humaneness of the seal hunt. In 1968, the government of the United States appointed a task force to look into methods used for killing seals off the Pribilof Islands. After experimenting with electrocution, captive bolt, gunshot, and carbon dioxide asphyxia, it concluded that none of the methods was as humane as stunning and bleeding. A year later, the Virginia Mason Research Center in Washington came up with the same conclusion. And again, in 1971, a committee of 6 veterinarians studying euthanasia for the American Veterinary Medical Association concluded that stunning, followed by exsanguination, constituted painless, humane euthanasia, and that, quote, the harvest could not be criticized from the standpoint of humaneness.
That's the sound of a baby harp seal, just a few days old. Hello, I'm Mary Tyler Moore for the International Fund for Animal Welfare. This spring, the ice-off Labrador will again be teeming with these beautiful little white-coated seals. Well, at least for a few days, until the Norwegian and Canadian seal hunters, if you can call them that, club 120,000 of them to death, almost the entire infant population. And the crazy thing about it is that the sealing industry is dying right along with the seal population. If something's not done about it now, then they'll take the last seal pup with them when they go. So it's now up to us. The Canadian and Norwegian governments are very
Sealing has caused a lot of upset, so how am I to feel when I am told it's a terrible thing, the killing of the seals? They say it is right to be saving the seal, but examine the facts before you say how you feel. Solutions are simple when you don't pay the cost, but it's somebody's livelihood you're writing off. Who pays the price? Do you know who pays for your comfortable cushions and affluent ways? Who pays the piper that's singing your song? Who owns the hog that you're living high on? To see animals killed, we say we can't stand, but we're eating pork chops all over this land. It's easy to judge when we're one step removed, and we don't have to walk in another man's shoes. Who pays the price? Do you know who pays for your comfortable cushions and affluent ways? Who pays the piper that's singing your song? Who owns the hog that you're living high on?
Brian Davies, head of the International Fund for Animal Welfare.
I think that the primary issue, as far as we're concerned, is whether Canadians want to tolerate a seal hunt, which we believe, and I stress we believe, to be barbaric and cruel. I think that there is now another issue, probably equally as important, some might feel more important, and that is that if the commercial seal hunt continues at anything like its present level, many scientists believe that the seal will become extinct in a relatively short period of time.
As anyone knows who's seen a photo of a cute, cuddly, white-coated seal pup, the protest movement plays strongly on our emotions. The International Fund for Animal Welfare is perhaps the one group who has capitalized on this aspect most, emphasizing in its literature the carnage committed yearly against small, defenseless baby seals. Well, the fact is that in order to ensure the seal herd stability, killing the newborn pups is the most sensible approach to management. Ontario Humane Society Director Tom Hughes explains.
One of the things we've done is persuade the government to introduce a quota on harp seals, and they can only take 5% of that quota as adults. It's restricted to 5%. So the 95% of the quota is the young of the year. The reason for that, very simply, is that that is the most efficient way of managing any herd of animals. You don't kill the breeding stock. You take the crop, if that's the word, and I don't particularly like it, you take the crop from the product of the year, the young, just as we do in our farms. We don't, as I say, we don't kill the cows, we take the calves. Same with the seals. If you kill the breeding stock, the adults, then of course eventually the herd will decline.
But not all protest groups share the IFAW's claim about cruelty. Greenpeace's main platform in the protest has always been ecology, to stop what they believe to be the exploitation of an endangered species. But whatever their claims, one thing is certain, as Dr. David Levine explains.
We still have, well, if we take the commonly used figure, which is probably as good as anywhere, somewhere around 1.2 million harp seals. So there are lots of them. It's a long-lived species, and we hunt primarily pups. So using any definition of the word endangered, I don't think we can call the harp seal an endangered species. The International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources has a system of categorizing species according to their present state, and the harp seal is not classified as an endangered species by them or by anyone else. And I don't know of any scientists who call the harp seal an endangered species at the present time.
But it wasn't always this way. Out on Newfoundland's bleak northeast coast back in the 1700s, when French and English settlers first began battling the harsh life in this isolated wilderness, the seals were welcome prey. Their hides became leather for boots and clothing, their meat a rich food for hungry families, and their thick layers of fat rendered down into oil for lamps and soap. Soon after, enterprising merchants saw the profits to be made, and the hunt became a yearly ritual, carrying hundreds of men in large sailing ships to the dangerous ice floes. Men's lives were lost, but far more seal pelts were won, some catches numbering over 600,000 in the mid-1800s. As the commercial hunt continued into this century, bigger and better boats brought the men closer to the seals, and the herds became drastically depleted. By the 1960s, catches came to less than 10% of what they had been during the hunt's heyday. With the seals in obvious danger, the humane organizations stepped in, demanding controls to protect the seals from extinction and from the free-for-all killing that became prevalent when non-licensed hunters began shooting at seals from hovering aircraft. Tom Hughes recalls the gradual pressure put on the government to act.
In 1972, the Humane Movement of Canada reached the conclusion that the government of Canada were not doing enough research into the seal ecology and were not getting independent information on how to manage the seal herd. We were also concerned, of course, with increased protection for the way the seals were killed. We recommended to the Minister of Fisheries for Canada that he form a special advisory committee on seals and sealing. That committee was formed at our request. The Minister gave us complete carte blanche, freedom to go wherever we want, the funds to do our work with, complete total support.
In the ensuing years, the Committee on Seals and Sealing funded and studied extensive research into the harp seal question. Modifications were made yearly on the regulations which enforced the humane killing procedures, and preliminary counts showed the herd population still relatively healthy. But the big question was still the one of numbers. How many seals were out there, and then how many seals could be killed and still ensure the herd's safety?
In 1976, I think it was, 76, we asked that the sealing be abandoned for 1 year in 77. Not because we were concerned about the seals, because we wanted to have the opportunity to film the seal herd undisturbed by hunting. The government didn't accept our recommendation. Again, probably Norway wouldn't have accepted it anyway. But they did delay. The Minister of Fisheries of Canada, the Honourable Romeo LeBlanc, give him credit, in a most unpopular move, postponed the opening of the hunt in 1977. That gave us 4 or 5 days to photograph the seals, and we got better imagery that year than any year before. We got pretty good imagery that year because the weather cooperated. We had an almost perfect overflight on the front. Almost perfect. There was no criticism of it by anybody. It was a darn good job. The estimate was based on that was that approximately 250,000 pups were born in the front and about 100,000 in the Gulf. So the total pup production in 77 was about 350,000.
The filming Tom Hughes is referring to is a technique of taking aerial censuses using highly sensitive ultraviolet photographs. Developed by zoologist Dr. David Levine and his Norwegian colleague Niels Ortsland, it registers the white-coated pups as dark markings on the white ice. Since the pups stay on the ice during the first 3 weeks of life, never entering the water, the number of pups registered in the photographs is most likely the number of seal pups there actually is. But since it's the pups that are being counted, the relative adult population must then be estimated. Now, these resulting estimates may not be completely accurate, and so scientists rely heavily on other methods as well. and one of these is population models, where scientists examine general features of the species to indicate trends in the herd.
The population models, of course, are constructed on the basis of knowledge of certain biological characteristics of the population, the natural mortality rate, the fecundity rate, the rate at which these animals mature. And this information is put into a computer along with catch statistics and age samples from the population. And what you try to do is create a harp seal herd in a computer. And where you're lacking data, what you have to do is make certain assumptions. And some assumptions are based on some data, but it's not very good data. Some assumptions are simply straight assumptions because the data are lacking.
What these models should be used for then is to tell scientists what parameters in the population are important and where they should direct further research. What actually happens, though, is government officials who need facts and figures to make management decisions take the numbers from the models and accept them as fact.
To take the absolute values of animal numbers from a model certainly was not the intended use of a model in the way that models were originally conceived. But what happens, of course, when a scientist is forced to give an answer by management people, the best answer, if you happen to be a modeler, comes from your model. But the data simply aren't that good, that the results should be believed carte blanche. You have to look for other things.
And that means going back to the herd itself for direct evidence. One way of confirming the present theories is by comparing the numbers suggested by the population models to the actual counts from future ultraviolet photography. Another trend to watch is what scientists call a density-dependent relationship. For example, if in fact the seal herd was being overexploited and the population was declining, what scientists would then see is the age of maturity going down as well. In other words, the animals would compensate for their low numbers by reproducing quicker and earlier. The problem, though, is that trends like these will show up gradually, over 5-year periods perhaps. The instant results are impossible. The conclusion from all this? Well, the models may be right, but only time will bear them out.
When the initial management policy was established in 1971, the suggestion was that the population might begin to increase around 1977-78. So on that basis, we might expect in the next few years to see some signs from the population itself that it is in fact increasing in numbers. Our census results certainly haven't supplied us with any information to indicate that the population is increasing at the present time, but the key word here is uncertainty, and the problem is that in the setting of quotas, management has demanded much more precise estimates, and these have not been forthcoming from the data, and I think it's a bit dishonest to suggest that we know that there are 1.25 million harp seals, or we know that the population is increasing. There is some evidence that it is. There is a lack of evidence directly from the population that it is in fact increasing at the present time. And what management is forced to do then is to go with the best available evidence.
You have been listening to 3 Blows to the Skull, the first of 2 programs investigating the economic and political aspects of the controversial Newfoundland seal hunt. Next, in One Man's Work, Another's Protest, you will hear more about the funding of seal hunt supporters and its antagonists. This series was researched and written by Bill Usher and Deborah Sharp. It was produced in Montreal by Susan Lumsden. I'm Kathy Kiefler for Radio Canada International. The Newfoundland seal hunt. This is the second of 2 programs on the Newfoundland seal hunt, presented by Radio Canada International. I'm Kathy Kiefler. Every month of March for the past 10 or more years, a moral battle has raged, not only on the ice floes off the coast of Newfoundland, but on editorial pages and on the airwaves across North America and Europe. While researching these programs in Newfoundland and elsewhere, freelance broadcasters Bill Usher and Deborah Sharp found out that the seal hunt is indeed a lucrative one, not only for the people in the fur business, but also for those opposed to it. Listen now to more of the economic and political side of the Newfoundland seal hunt in this second program entitled One Man's Work, Another's Protest. Here's Bill Usher.
When you start listening to Humane Society experts and population model scientists, as we have done in the first segment of this program, you can't help but come away with the strong feeling that the people who are most knowledgeable about the seal hunt agree that the hunt is humane and that the harp seal is not an endangered species headed for extinction. But the large majority of the public is still confused. In the past several years, what is really a very complicated issue has been dealt with both simplistically and sensationally by the press. In the same way that bloody pictures of infant whitecoats encourage healthy donations, they also sell newspapers. But who is really to blame here? The post-Watergate years have nurtured a powerful distrust of government, and we've all had our eyes open to ecological disasters that leave us sympathetic and willing to give to crusading ecological underdogs. The vast majority who donate an estimated $3 million a year to support the protesters of the hunt sincerely believe that what they are doing is right and in the best interests of society. However, somewhere along the line, the messages get crossed, and what the animal welfare groups have many believing is simply not true.
It seems like any piece of scientific information will be taken. The parts that support the opposition to the hunt will be drawn out of it, and the rest of it will be ignored.
Rick Hayes is a journalist in St. John's, Newfoundland.
This year, the boys didn't reach their quota, and immediately we heard from several of the protest groups that, they didn't reach their quota because the seals are so decimated there aren't enough left to be killed. Well, that's a bunch of hogwash. What had happened this year was that we had extremely heavy ice conditions around the whelping ice where the pups are born, and the ships couldn't get at them. Now, that's well known to me as a journalist. It's well known to the federal fisheries boys. It's well known to the sealers. It's well known to the guys who ran the icebreakers. It's well known to the international press who reported that. And yet, an organization like Greenpeace or like the International Fund for Animal Welfare will come out and fly in the face of that kind of backing and just state that they couldn't get the quota because there weren't enough seals. Yet, how do you chase that lie down? Because you're always left in the position of answering a lie.
What they do is they take old material and update it. In other words, they'll take a statement we made in 1972 and publish that statement in 1978 without mentioning that this statement was made in 72, without mentioning that since then we've gained a lot more information.
Tom Hughes is the executive vice president of the Ontario Humane Society. Hughes was an outspoken critic of the seal hunt back in the 50s and 60s and has been largely responsible for causing the implementation of the regulations that now control the hunt.
The document recently circulated, I believe it was circulated in Britain. The group that published this document, an animal welfare trust, I think they were called, picked out a one single line in one of our models which showed that if we carried on killing seals at such and such a rate for a number of years, and if everything else happened and the moon was in the right quarter and seals stopped pupping and all sorts of eventualities had to happen, that the harp seal would be extinct by 1984. Well, obviously that's nonsense. But they took that particular statement out of context and published it and said that the scientific document produced by the Committee on Seals and Seal indicated that they believed the seal would be extinct by the year 1984. That's nonsense. Never believed that for one single minute. There were at least 100 projections in that same model. What we had done is we'd said to the computer, if we vary the mortality rate by 0.5 point or 1%, what will happen? The computer ran it off and said the seal will be extinct by 2020. If we increase it by another percent, what will happen? Off it went again, 1984. We were playing with numbers, not real seals. We were playing with a computer.
The we Tom Hughes is talking about is COSS, the Committee on Seals and Sealing, an advisory committee established in 1971 to study the seal hunt and make recommendations to the Canadian federal government. Made up of representatives from the humane movement, the scientific community, and industry, committee members maintain that they have been given complete carte blanche with no government interference. Brian Davies, head of the IFAW, however, calls the committee a political tool, implying that in order to stay on the payroll, a scientist must twist his research to suit government purposes. When we asked Mr. Davies to comment on COSS member Dr. Harry Rozell's published observations of the hunt, he replied,
You realize that Dr. Rozell is funded through the Science Council of Canada, which in turn gets its funds from the federal government, which in turn is prepared to use whatever money and whatever pressure it can to continue the seal hunt. Were you aware of that?
We were aware that Dr. Rozell is a veterinary pathologist, is a professor at the University of Ottawa, and is the executive secretary of the Canadian Council on Animal Care. And he is funded not by the Science Council, as Mr. Davies suggests, but by the university and the National Research Council. This is the same body responsible for just about all funding of scientific research in Canada today. The interesting thing about Davies' differences with the existing research is that his organization itself, or for that matter any of the other anti-seal hunt groups, does not pay for any original research out of the monies collected. They study the existing data and then draw their own conclusions. As Mr. Davies says, it's all a matter of interpretation. But when Brian Davies wrote to the United Nations looking for support, he received a reply telling him they had examined the available information and were satisfied with the results. Who then does Brian Davies trust?
I am using the opinions of independent scientists, Dr. David Levine. He's the man that supervises the aerial surveys that used to take place.
Well, we then asked Dr. Levine if he thought he was more politically independent than Dr. Rozell.
This whole question of funding and where people get their funds is one that I find rather humorous, because the main funding organization for scientific research in Canada on a day-to-day basis is the federal government. National Research Council of Canada funds research in universities throughout Canada. And those of us who work with seals, no doubt on occasion will apply to the Fisheries and Marine Service, who have to do with, who are responsible for seal management for other funds. And the assumption always is that if you're getting funded from the government, there are strings attached. Well, although one can get into large debates about our freedoms in Canada and civil liberties and all the rest of it, I think it's really stretching the point to suggest that Harry Rozell or Dave Levine or Keith Ronald get money from the federal government, therefore they are not going to criticize or disagree with the Canadian government.
In fact, certain government scientists are disagreeing with their employer, including Dr. Levine, whose research is funded by this same federal government. He disagrees with the government's position on culling. What management officials are saying is that if there were no seal hunt and the herd was left to grow undisturbed, the size of the herd would eventually pose some serious problems to the commercial fishing industry. In other words, man and seals would be in competition with one another for the available fish stocks. The explanation goes something like this. Seals feed off a small fish called capelin. This is the same fish that cod eat. Fishermen are afraid that if the seal herd became too large and consumed more and more capelin, the cod stocks would eventually dwindle. And so the seals would have to be killed or culled to bring their numbers back down again and the cod stocks back up. What's not mentioned, though, in the argument are the enormous amounts of capelin that are being taken yearly by foreign fishing boats in Canadian waters. Dr. Levine claims that it's not the seals we have to worry about.
The harp seal is not a major factor, and the suggestion, which has been made publicly by certainly by certain government spokesmen, that if we stopped hunting harp seals today, we'd have to institute a culling program tomorrow, is probably not true. Sure, we have to manage, if we're going to manage the ecosystem, what we try to do is balance this against that. But management is if anything, an art. It's certainly not a well-defined or well-practiced science at the present time, and maybe by starting to look at ecosystem considerations, we'll get to that point. But it's a long way off. Sure, we will have to keep an eye on the situation, but if there's any threat right now, the threat is man overexploiting various components of the ecosystem, and this having deleterious effects on other components, whether they be harp seals, cod, whales, you name it. That's where the threat comes from, not from harp seals, cod, or whales.
Clearly, all the cards are on the table. But when Brian Davies is confronted with the deck, he chooses to deal another hand. To him, all this concern about ecosystem management is just wasted talk.
I couldn't care if the harp seals could sustain the present level of killing. I'm still against killing. I mean, don't get off onto a side issue that really has no relevance to the campaign. I happen to think that marine mammals are sensitive, intelligent creatures of a high level of life, and that they should not be subjected to the type of carnage that they have to go through every year.
Seals belong to the same group of animals as other carnivores. They happen to belong to a group that re-entered the aquatic medium. And because seals and whales tend to get grouped together, we often associate the high intelligence of a dolphin, certain of the small whales, with the intelligence of a seal. In my experience, the seal has sort of the intelligence of an average dog, or perhaps a slightly above average dog. They are obviously mammals with a large brain, and but to say that they are super intelligent animals who comprehend what's going on, if they were that smart, they'd find other places. They'd shift their breeding sites perhaps from year to year, or whatever. I mean, they don't comprehend what's going on. A female watches her pup being killed and enters the water and often never comes back. I don't think the argument of superintelligence works for seals.
Hi, this is Donny Osmond. You know, it's so easy to get caught up in work and enjoying life that sometimes you can overlook some of the bad things that can take place in our world. And I've heard about something that we just can't ignore any longer. It's the brutal slaughter of the baby harp seals in Canada, where men with hard wooden clubs and steel hooks are responsible for staining the ice off Labrador's coast with the blood of tens of thousands of helpless newborn seal pups. And only a few hundred part-time hunters, if you can call them that,
My name is Arthur Scammell, and I'm a retired school teacher. I was born in a northern Newfoundland outport, and I was brought up with the tradition of the seal hunt and the fishery, so I know something about it. We had, our creed was, earn an honest dollar when you can without hurting your neighbors. And I would like to see the rest of the world follow that simple creed. I wrote this song, Save Our Swilers, which tells the story of the goings-on at St. Anthony a year ago. Come, all you Newfoundlanders, and listen to my song about St. Anthony's visitors from away and up along. There were movie types and media types and Mounties, some 5 score. If we were bent on violence, boys, they'd need 100 more. They're out to ban the seal hunt, and this they mean to do. Brian Davies and the Greenpeacers and all their motley crew. This year they've got Franz Weber with phony fur to sell, a bleeding heart from Switzerland who thinks he's William Tell.
The North Atlantic harp seals arrive in the waters off the Newfoundland coast sometime in December or January. After a summer of feeding in the far north, they have made their migratory journey southwards, where they will breed their young in the winter months that follow. By the end of February and early in March, the whelping patches have formed on the craggy ice floes, and the white-coated seal pups are born. It is this crop of young seals that hunters in the large offshore sealing ships go after. In fact, only 5% of the catch is allowed to be adults, a precautionary measure taken to protect the size of the herd.
They say the seals are threatened, but the evidence is clear. With quotas carefully controlled, of that there is no fear. We're the endangered species who live by coastal seas. We kill the seal as we kill fish to feed our families.
After 3 weeks of suckling its mother's rich milk, the seal pup grows more than threefold, from a weight of 15 pounds at birth to between 60 and 70 pounds. It's during these first 3 weeks of life that the much publicized hunt at the front takes place. Most of the seal pup's weight is made up of a thick layer of blubber, and when a sealer skins a pup, what he takes back with him is this 3 to 4 inch layer of fat attached to the pelt and flippers. The bloody remains we see portrayed in the press, however, is not wasted meat as the protesters would have us believe. Once the pup has its scalp removed, what is left is mostly bone and internal organs. The carcass compares to about the size of a rabbit, and the meat on the bones is negligible. But the pelt and fat of a whitecoat bring a fair price of between $15 and $20, and when the ships make their entrance back into St. John's Harbor, the flippers, which are a traditional delicacy in Newfoundland, are bought up by welcoming townspeople, and seal flipper pie appears on the supper table with a holiday flourish.
When Bridget said in Paris she cuddled a whitecoat deer, sure every swiler in the land he grinned from ear to ear. He knows from long experience she's piling on the lies. A real whitecoat's talons would have slashed her face and eyes.
They killed too much baby seals, and now they are not hunters, they are killers.
They call us cruel, barbaric, hunting seals just for the thrill. These pampered city slickers that a day's hard work would kill. What do they know of challenges of storm and sea and ice that dare the blood to answer and to pay the sealer's price?
Into April, and the month-old pups begin to shed their infant whitecoat, eventually molting completely into the soft spotted gray coat of an immature seal. With the breeding completed and spring approaching, the seal herd begins to travel north again towards its summer home. As they migrate slowly up the Newfoundland coast, inshore fishermen go out daily in small boats, hoping to catch whatever seals come by their part of the shore. And now that more mature seals are being brought in, the carcass too is a valued part of the kill. The meat is brought back to be sold to canning factories and shared among family and friends. By late April, the hunt is virtually over, and the seal cycle begins again in its northern home.
This is Jaja Gabor urging you to write to the Canadian government with your feelings about the annual baby harp seal hunt. Every letter counts.
We're not averse to meeting up with a star from Hollywood. We sure would like to rescue her from an angry old doghood. But the Arctic floes are not the place, Yvette, to use your wiles. We're not spruced up for courting when we're out there pelting swiles.
And for what, man? For souvenirs and novelty items like bookmarkers and stuffed toy animals. Really, we've got to draw the line somewhere. Please help my friends at the International Fund for Animal Welfare stop this wasteful killing.
But what actually does happen to the seal pelt and carcass? It's certainly true that the meat takes a second billing to the pelt. At present, Newfoundlanders comprise the main market for seal meat, and with a population of only 500,000, they can eat only so much. But the Newfoundland government is currently investigating international markets, and given that seal meat is richer in protein than beef, it may well develop into a valuable food source in years to come. In the meantime, it's still the short-haired fur and rich fat that constitute the seal industry. Contrary to what some may think, markets for the pelt of the whitecoat are better than ever. The fur takes easily to dyeing, and it's quite likely that most of us wouldn't recognize one of these coats if we saw one. The fat, perhaps, is even more valuable. It's used in cosmetics and edible oil products such as margarine. And because the oil rendered from the fat freezes at an extremely low temperature, it's utilized in finely tooled aircraft instruments. In fact, Captain Morsey Johnson claims that in 1978, his men at the front made more than 50% of their income from the fat and flippers.
There's many things we don't approve in countries far away, how people act and dress and talk and how they earn their pay. But we don't get up a hate campaign and stir up children too, to force our views on other folks as these do-gooders do.
To the Newfoundlander, the trinket and luxury industry spoken of by Brian Davies' celebrities is only another example of misguided individuals espousing manipulated information, which sooner or later invokes hatred from the rest of the world. Moreover, the Newfoundlanders accuse Davies himself of living in the lap of luxury that his own rhetoric has him condemning. Eventually, the incongruities pile up. If what we've learned to be true for the most part refutes the protesters' claims, then what is all the to-do about?
What's to do about? $3 million, that's what's to do. $3 million generated by the protest movement, and the protesters are becoming rich on it. Brian Davies has become a rich man in 10 years on the protest movement. He was a very, very poor boy. He was a young lad. Okay, today he's a wealthy man. He just moved to Cape Cod, where he'll be buying a large home in the Cape. 1976, which is the last tax year I got my hands onto, he picked up about $98,000 from the foundation, from the fund. $48,000 in salary, $12,000 unstated traveling expenses, $28,000 to remodel his home, and $8,000 to rent his home back to himself as an office for the fund. That's about $95,000. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's all sorts of gimmicks that have to be looked into. Maybe he's paying himself a salary to fly the helicopter owned by the fund to take the people out to the ice. Perhaps he was getting so much an hour as the pilot of the helicopter. He chartered the helicopter to Ebenstein Travel in New York to take tourists to the Magdalen Islands, and he was the pilot who flew the helicopter that took the people out from the shore out to the seals. Was he receiving some sort of a cutback from commission is a better word, on Hans Ebenstein Travel for his part or his role in that sort of operation? There's a dozen different ways. Now, these dangers don't occur in society like the Ontario Humane because we're a public body. We're open to scrutiny, inspection. We've auditors, we've got members, we've got a big membership structure that meets every year and demands answers. He has no members. The directors are his friends. He doesn't have an annual meeting. He doesn't report to anybody. If he decides his salary is $48,000 a year, it's $48,000 a year. He makes a decision himself to pay himself $48,000. When asked, he said he thought that was rather a decent salary, appropriate for his responsibilities. What responsibility? He doesn't do anything. He just flies around the world raising more money, to raise more money, to raise more money, to raise more money.
I make $45,000 a year as executive director of this organization. It's a complex, difficult job. I mean, it's not easy meeting and defending myself in front of people like you. It takes a certain amount of ability. I personally raise all of the money, the $1 million, fly helicopters, fly fixed-wing aircraft for the fund, coordinate all the programs.
Okay, everybody, we'd just like to show you the main prize of the raffle tonight in aid of the International Fund for Animal Welfare. And the tickets are on sale down here at 10p each.
Sealing is the easiest thing in the world. Everybody's jumping on the bandwagon. The RSPCA, all these American societies, they all know that all they have to do is to put a picture of the white coat pup and say, skinned alive, or words to that effect, which I've never seen, by the way, ever. And he hasn't either. And the money pours in.
It's an image which just goes right to the heart of animal lovers all over North America.
Paul Watson, a former director of the Greenpeace Foundation, was asked to resign from the board of directors when he took exception to the tactics used to fight the hunt. He estimates that if all the donations received by organizations like the IFAW, the Animal Protection Institute, Greenpeace, the Fund for Animals, and the Animal Welfare Trust were totaled, the annual figure would be in the neighborhood of $3 to $4 million. An interesting figure when you realize that the seal hunt is worth $5.5 million to the economy of the Atlantic provinces. More interesting, perhaps, is that this $3 million is 10 times the amount collected annually from the public by Amnesty International, a group fighting the torture and killing of humans. Paul Watson was asked how they spent the money.
I don't think they spent anything. They put their money into advertising, which they say makes the public aware, and also it has their address on the corner, which has people send in more money. So, in fact, every time they invest money in advertising, they make more money back in return.
I don't know, I suppose to me the whole opposition to the hunt is based on emotion and not on intellect. To a person who lives in an area where meat is something you buy in the supermarket, not something you kill in the backyard or on the ice fields, you see a picture of a baby whitecoat or a seal pup. It's a very cute, attractive little bundle of fur for about 2 weeks before it becomes a raggedy jacket and starts turning into a real seal. And it's very easy with that picture of the beautiful white face and the big brown eyes, complete with, quote, tears, and there is no such thing as a seal crying. Seals cannot cry. They do not have tear ducts. What it is, it's the irritation of the cold on the eyes. But a person sees that, and it's a very emotive thing. You look at it and you say, what a pity to kill a thing like that. And I don't know, I get the feeling a lot of times that it's a lot easier for me to worry about what's happening in Bangladesh than it is to look in my own backyard and see what's going on. It's safer for me.
Taking a somewhat cynical view, it's possible to see money and personal gain as the bottom line of the seal hunt controversy. Newfoundlanders fighting to preserve an income-producing industry, and the protesters doing essentially the same, fighting to keep alive the conflict that will feed their cause and pay their way. But after all is said and done, and all the facts examined, each person must make a final decision. Both Newfoundland Premier Frank Moores and IFAW Director Brian Davies have made their personal decisions a cause célèbre. And until the public and press lose interest, they'll continue to battle it out in the name of the seals and the sealers.
It is easy to see why these and other people condemn us. They are deeply concerned about the welfare of all animals, and they have been deluged with false propaganda.
May I ask what that false information is?
Could you identify yourself, please?
Brian Davies, Executive Director of the International Fund for Animal Welfare.
The false information, as I see it, is that you're saying that the seal hunt is inhumane. Our experts from the humane societies, qualified people, say that it is not.
I believe the seal hunt is cruel and inhumane, and I think that it's despicable that you should cast doubt on the integrity of an individual or an organization for taking that position. You should be ashamed of yourself, sir.
Well, I'm not.
But you should be.
You have been listening to the second of a two-part series on the economics and politics of the Newfoundland seal hunt. It was researched and written by Bill Usher and Deborah Sharp. In a companion program series produced by Radio Canada International, you may hear some of the vivid stories and songs of the legendary Newfoundland seal hunt. This series on the economics and politics of the Newfoundland seal hunt was produced in Montreal by Susan Lumsden. I'm Kathy Kiefler for Radio Canada International.